The Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor on Bedloe Island, the focus of the goddess of liberty. No other ascended being in this system of worlds is as recognizable in the earth, perhaps besides our beloved Jesus Christ. In her arms are depicted two symbols of the focus of her flame, which work hand in hand to manifest the truth of her being, the law in her left arm, and the freedom of opportunity of the threefold flame of liberty raised in her right arm, not one separate from the other, as some in this day and age seem to believe is the case. Our beloved goddess of liberty is the spokesman for the karmic board and the representative of the second ray on that board. She is the hierarch of the Temple of the Sun. Her etheric retreat is over that island of Manhattan where her statue stands. She holds the consciousness of liberty for the earth. The goddess of liberty personally liberated millions of souls on a number of planets prior to her ascension. She was also embodied as a member of the Amazonian race, a people of great stature whose women ruled an ancient civilization where the Amazon basin now is. During her embodiment upon Atlantis, she erected the Temple of the Sun, where Manhattan Island now is, patterning it after the solar temple in the great central sun. And the central altar was dedicated to the threefold flame of the liberty of the Christ, which proceeds from the white fire core of being, focused by our beloved Alpha and Omega. This shrine was surrounded by 12 lesser shrines attended by representatives of the solar hierarchies, who together with the goddess of liberty invoked on behalf of the evolutions of earth the spiritual radiation of the sun behind the sun. And just prior to sinking of Atlantis, the goddess of liberty transported that liberty flame enshrined at the temple to a place of safety in another retreat of the Great White Brotherhood at the Château de Liberté in southern France. When Atlantis went down in cataclysm, the Temple of the Sun was withdrawn to the etheric octave, and the activities of the Brotherhood of Liberty continue at the etheric plane, where the physical temple once stood. And so great was the momentum of dedication to the spirit of liberty embodied in the threefold flame of her heart, that after her ascension, this Lady Master was called upon to bear the title of Goddess of Liberty, denoting her office and hierarchy as the authority for the cosmic consciousness of liberty to the earth. And the spirit of liberty inspired the early American patriots to found a new nation under God and to frame a constitution based on the Brotherhood's plan for the emerging Christ consciousness that would come to maturity on virgin soil under the direction of Saint Germain, the God of freedom for the earth. A considerable number of Americans at that time accepted the presence of this goddess and the intervention of heavenly intercessors as a natural part of life. The art and literature of the period frequently depicted angelic beings, gods and goddesses in clouds of glory. You can see those paintings on the ceilings in Washington, D.C., in the cathedrals. The goddess of liberty, patroness of the sacred cause, espoused by the patriots, was perhaps the most revered of all the heavenly hosts. So this teaching today comes from a transcription of a lecture given by Elizabeth Clare Prophet on October 5th, 1979, entitled Let Liberty Be Proclaimed, a Bodhisattva by the Name of Liberty. The dictation that Elizabeth Clare Prophet reads from in this teaching is not available in audio, but it is published as Pearl of Wisdom, Volume 6, Number 26, delivered on June 28th, 1963, by the Goddess of Liberty. So Elizabeth Clare Prophet began her lecture in 1979 by saying, I'm going to read to you the words of the Goddess of Liberty from a very early release. The words of the Goddess of Liberty are most precious. They have not been that frequent since 1958. But every word she has spoken has been the thrust of the right arm of the Lord through her, a very important presence in our life. So she is the Bodhisattva, the Mother of Grace, the one who stands for us and between us and the karma of the nation. And just a little bit about her initiations that she gives us. And this comes from the tsl.org encyclopedia. Although the Goddess of Liberty has attained initiations at cosmic levels and need not remain with the planet, the Goddess of Liberty has taken the vow to remain in the service of the earth until every last man, woman, and child has made his ascension. Can you believe that? This is the Bodhisattva ideal. The Goddess of Liberty has said about that, when I stand in the temple of the sun, when I stand in the harbor of New York, beloved ones, I say to myself the mantra of the Bodhisattvas. It all depends on you. That is why I stand and still stand, because I believe the mantra of my guru, beloved Vesta, who shines in the sun and who repeats the mantra of her guru. It all depends on you. When you know it through and through, you will not fail. For the eye of compassion, the mother's eye, so mild and pure, looking upon the life waves beneath her feet, cannot escape the truth. It all depends on you. Children of my heart, rise and pass through the door of objectivity and become the woman clothed with the sun. The Goddess of Liberty has called for 1,000 faithful ones to decree to preserve America's destiny. And let us fulfill that in God's will. The Bodhisattva meaning is a Sanskrit term, literally meaning a being of Bodhi or enlightenment, a being destined for enlightenment, or one whose energy and power is directed toward enlightenment. So we go on and hear what Mother said here. I have come and told you that everyone who comes here or who is born here in the United States receives the initiation of the threefold flame of liberty from the Goddess of Liberty. Everyone who is an American citizen, a naturalized citizen, or one who was born here. This is a very special initiation. It is given to light bearers and laggards alike. Everyone who comes to these shores has the opportunity to be initiated by the Goddess of Liberty. And if you have family or friends who have ever spoken of the moment when they first arrived and saw the Statue of Liberty, you know the tremendous swelling in their hearts at that moment, when that feeling of her love, which is actually that moment of initiation. When the ship passes her statue in New York Harbor, and unfortunately, most people are no longer coming by ship, but can still see her from the air. Elizabeth Prophet said, It was never until I went abroad and traveled all over the world. And then I asked El Moria, what makes Americans different from Asians, Europeans, Africans? Why is it when you go to Europe, you find no sense of unity that you find in America? A great deal of separation, a personal pride, a non-willingness for many centuries to become one. And now only out of economic necessity or necessities of defense do we see a greater unity coming about. El Moria said to Miss Prophet, he said, to me, the difference is the flame of the goddess of liberty. Why can peoples form such divergent backgrounds, from such divergent backgrounds, become one people in America and never come together in Europe? Even in Africa, you find the separation, not only of nations, but very small tribal units that have been fighting and having their rivalries. They're opposing black magic for centuries. And as soon as they become Americans, they are one people and one flame. And the message is that Mother Liberty places the focus of her fleur de lis, the little threefold flame within our hearts. And we begin a path of initiation. Whatever our level, wherever we have come from, wherever we have left off, no matter how dark the soul or how brilliant, it has the opportunity to come a part of what is called the melting pot. But really, it is the I am race. The I am race, the letters come out of the word America. It's the race of light bearers who are running with the torch of freedom, who do not shirk the responsibility of seizing it when it is past, who take it, run with it, and it becomes an all-consuming passion. And we know of many people who have come to the United States. Most of us have had our relatives. Most have come from other nations. My grandparents came from Eastern Europe. I might not have been here if they hadn't escaped that time in the early 20th century. My grandmother and grandfather on my father's side did not know each other, but they met here in the United States and worked in the coal mines and working and cleaning houses in the Western Pennsylvania area. I remember my father saying that my grandparents were told that the streets were lined with gold in the United States. They actually believed that. They were peasants. Many of you have similar stories of your ancestors, of your family. It was a wonderful, wonderful stories that we have of the Americans, of the I am race, and how they worked and seized that very initiation, the courage to actually get on a boat, to leave their home countries, and mostly their families, where they came without their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers, sometimes just a friend or a neighbor. They came alone. My grandmother never learned to speak English. They were Ukrainian. And then they were able to work and buy a piece of land. So inspired my father. These immigrants, these peasant immigrants who bought a farm, was also had only a 9th or 10th grade education. The point is, these were initiations. These were the steps, the legal steps to come in to America and under the tutelage of the Goddess of Liberty. What does the Goddess of Liberty say about this initiation? On July 5th, 1986, the Goddess of Liberty gave a teaching that was probably the last 4th of July conference at Camelot in Malibu. I was there. I remember that was the rededication of the Statue of Liberty in 1986. And there was a wonderful, momentous situation at that time of the rededication, and our President Ronald Reagan at the time, and what he said So I'm going to read here what happened and what the Goddess of Liberty said about this teaching on American citizenship on July 5th, 1986. Those then who become Americans do so by the initiation of the Goddess of Liberty, whose office I hold, which being I am. Therefore, it is an initiation of the heart and of the threefold flame. And those who enter into that sacred commitment to be citizens of the United States do receive an impetus of my threefold flame, which is an action for the balancing and bringing into alignment of their own threefold flame. I place there the fleur-de-lis of my being as an electronic blueprint or matrix, if you will. And therefore, it is like a rudder, a steadying force that keeps the individual recreating and raising up those three plumes in balance. And thus, I work very closely with beloved Gautama, Lord of the world. The initiation of the heart which I give must be earned and won. As I give, therefore, the etheric blueprint, so from the day of citizenship onward, beloved, there must be a proving, there must be a working, there must be a knowledge of the word. Therefore, I carry the book of the law that represents not alone the Constitution, but the divine document, citing the divine rights of the sons of God upon this planetary home. And it remains for you to distill from my heart through your Christ self what are those divine rights, so that you may come to understand that every line of the Constitution does reflect an inner divine right, which is made applicable to the human scene of karma, of a nation, and the dealing with the economy and the settling of old scores with the fallen ones. Therefore, beloved, those who become Americans must prove their ability to be the keepers of the flame of liberty, and thus understand how it is that the one occupying the highest secular office of the nation, and this is where she refers to President Ronald Reagan at the time, on July 4th of 1986, stating and affirming for all people of this nation the vow of those who take the initiation from me, we are the keepers of the flame of liberty. Elizabeth Clare Prophet goes on to say in her lecture, there are obviously those who have come to our shores who have not accepted the spiral of initiation. They have plundered America. They have entered into the mainstream of her life only to take from her and not to give. They have become wealthy. They have become internationalists. They have not felt a loyalty to her flame, but they have been willing to sell the soul of America for a mess of pottage, which has turned out to be dollars, which may be worthless dollars before long. And this was 1979 when inflation rates were very high, my interjection there. And they will find that all they could have sold their soul for, that paper can just as easily go up in the flame as their human creation could have gone up in the flame had they chosen to surrender it first before their substance would be taken from them in an avalanche of karma. So our heritage, she says, is because this Bodhisattva, by the name of liberty, was determined to keep the mother flame in this nation. Saint Germain is her son, and he has sponsored this nation in her name. It is exciting to think that America and India are the two nations of the earth sponsored by the Great White Brotherhood. They are unique of all nations, and there is no way that one can simply take that light and look at all other nations and say, we are all equal. We are not all equal. And our lack of equality is not because we are better people necessarily. Our exceptional light is quality of greater responsibility. America and India are different because her people have the responsibility of holding the balance of the father and the mother light to the earth. This endowment, this gift, comes all the way from the heart of Sanat Kumara. Until we come of age, realize our Christ consciousness, we in the flame of the mother, India in the flame of the father, and the reverse is also true. Until we weave the caduceus of light, east and west, come into that maturity and understanding of preaching the gospel to other nations, the torch of this Dharma, this initiation, this light, can't be passed to other nations. What we see in American political thought today, that which is attempting to destroy that very Dharma, the idea that all people should be equal, that we should give away everything we have, and although it is couched in the terms of food or wealth or energy, it really is the fallen ones attempting to force America and those who have earned their light by initiation to give that light away to those who have not earned it by initiation. So today, 47 years later, we have many who have entered America not by the law. And we see we have a tremendous issue. I work in social services and have for over 25 years. There are many avenues and programs to help those who are in need. But you must go through many steps to get those benefits. You can't just walk in and say, I want them. The people who have lived here, some of my clients are over 100 years old. They still must apply. They still must give all of their documentation to prove who they are and what they have. It is not something, a matter of just being here that you receive it. Elizabeth Prophet goes on to say about a tremendous sale of grain at that time was concluded to the Soviet Union. And she says that grain feeds a nation whose avowed aim at the time was to destroy the US and the flame of freedom in the earth. In the name of starving millions, we are told we must give away what we have. And yet the ascended masters intend that we should feed the poor, the world around. This is true. But that is not the question. The questions are when the substance and the abundance of America become a means of politically destroying the nation, economically destroying a nation. And we can see that today. There is fraud, people taking advantage of the flame of liberty. We don't wish people harm, and it's not that we don't want to help people, but you must pass through the steps of initiation and work through the process. The very ones who have misused the capitalist system, says Elizabeth Prophet, to build giant monopolies, to pile up wealth beyond wealth, and then use it to destroy America from abroad. These are the ones who have taken the light and energy, the food and gold itself that we have a right to share with all people everywhere, beginning with the poor on our own soil, and then extending it wherever and however we can. As I have traveled abroad, she says, I have seen the extreme resentment of peoples who have been nourished and rebuilt by millions of American dollars. I have seen hatred in Western nations. I see hatred in Western nations for America, hatred of us as a people, a hatred born of jealousy and envy. I have not seen the much we have done for many nations produce a feeling of God gratitude, but only a further hatred toward America because America has not done enough. Now let's take that back to today and the FIFA World Soccer that has been here for a month in the United States. And some of the reactions of the Europeans have come here from other nations, all nations, and found out that America was not so bad as they had heard through a media that may have had a biased opinion and projection of the goddess of liberty in this great land of opportunity. And they found out, wow, this is not so bad. I don't even think I want to go back home in some cases, some people have said. So things may have changed when people actually see the truth. on their own. So she says, I have seen very wealthy nations, tyrants in power, have amassed great wealth, misusing the light of their own nations in Africa, South America. I've seen their poor and starving millions going hungry, and they, the tyrants, looking to America to feed their hungry, to mop up when cataclysm of returning karma descends upon them, to provide medical aid and all that is needed. So she says, America has become, in effect, Mother Liberty personified. Whenever you're in trouble, whenever you need anything, you go to Mother. Mother Liberty will feed you, clothe you. But there is a misinterpretation of this going to Mother, because Mother Liberty does not transfer the torch except by the path of initiation. And we have not demanded that these nations, that their politics or economics come up to the standard of the Christ consciousness when we offer these hands. We've not exacted a price for our wheat. It would be very easy to say, no more wheat or no more whatever product until at that time the Soviet troops leave Cuba. A hungry stomach sometimes changes the mind and heart. But a full stomach has no need for compromise. We have leaders at that time and even today who have never studied David or Joseph or the great prophets of the Old Testament, who don't understand history, the history of war, the strategy of war and of peace. We're a nation that has enough wealth and abundance today and not enough light to actually keep the peace and keep the freedom of the entire earth. Not by war, not by guns, not by more nuclear weapons, but by a simple logistical understanding of how to use the technology we have, how to withhold it from enemies, how not to arm all kinds of nations until every little group of enemies all over the world can conduct their own private nuclear wars with one another. She says we have top military secrets of our nations now known, published in papers and magazines, and now on the internet, electronically, much more higher, sophisticated communication systems 47 years later that will increase the proliferation of nuclear weapons throughout the world. We have the capacity to seal and keep private our intelligence as long as we are not invaded by enemies. Yet we have been and we are, and those enemies, as you know, are the tares which the wicked one has sown among the wheat in every nation. And therefore, from the very inception of our country, God has given us the light, the teaching, the energy, and all that we need to build an abundant life. For every nation to export real education for our youth everywhere and the true fundamental principles of religion. All that has have been sealed in this nation by the Goddess of Liberty and Saint Germain, and look what the fallen ones have made of it. They practically bring us to our knees so that by our misunderstanding of dealing in war and peace and détente, the misunderstanding of the fusion of peace and appeasement, we now are within a few short years until the 1980s. This was 1979. And she says, unless the trends change, we may find ourselves right before the blackmail of the Soviet Union and even Red China. She talks about here, no sooner do we establish relations with Red China than the Red Chinese are off to Moscow making a big pact of friendship. And she says, of course, why not? Why not? Didn't the enemies of Christ suddenly become friends in the hour when they wanted him crucified? They were enemies of one another. I remember that so well depicted in the series, The Chosen. Herod and Pilate, the meeting, the Sanhedrin, they hated each other, but they came together to become friends of sort, to destroy the divine man-child of the Christ of Jesus. The Goddess of Liberty brings to us how to consider how we may undo the damage that has been done. And indeed, she says probably the greatest damage that has been done began just following the assassination of President Lincoln. From that hour to the present and to this day, we find the destruction of our monetary system, the destruction of the gold standard eventually, a huge inflation in 1979. It was extremely high. The ability for the Arab world at that time to play with the economy, to force the prices of gold beyond the reach of our own people, and to create such instability that we ourselves wonder what is coming upon this land. So the goddess of liberty has said, we are on the brink of a golden age, one way or the other. And I believe we are. One way is by the destruction, says Elizabeth Prophet, of the nations and of America. And the other way is by the avoidance of that destruction by the light bearers. She says it is indeed a solemn moment. And those of you who have heard us speaking since 1958 have heard the same message. She said that's only 21 years, but that's many more years now, 2026. She said that Noah preached for a century before the flood, and he preached the same message every day, 100 years. We're seeing that great good has been accomplished by the light bearers, but much more must be done. The teachings of the Brotherhood and their dictations. So she begins and goes to this dictation from June 28th, 1963, and begins this dictation, let liberty be proclaimed. And she stops there and says, I'm going to stop here because Sana Kumara has given us the word to preach. And we have learned in our very profound meditation upon preaching and proclaiming the word and witnessing to the word that it is an essential part of the path. It says in this dictation, liberty is not enough when it is burning in our hearts. It must be proclaimed. When it is proclaimed, spoken of, she says, witness to, it becomes a flow of light through your heart. It is a mounting light. It is the word itself. You become the word. You become the message. And the fire in you increases. In other words, the very manifestations of proclaiming or preaching the word of freedom or liberty is the means of your acceleration to God. It is an essential part of the path of the rose cross of Jesus Christ. She said, I have seen people who have sat year in and year out. You may even think about yourselves and where you are. These are my words. And she says, with the teachings of the Ascended Masters, but they have a certain personal pride of profession, family, standing in the community, and no one of their friends or family or business associates have any idea that they are students of the Ascended Masters. So they effectively hide their light under a bushel. They're like Nicodemus, who came to Jesus by night. And Nicodemus is still in embodiment at that time in 1979. She says that he now had the opportunity to ascend in that life, but we must see that all points of the law be fulfilled. And when we are not ready to witness, we're really saying what we're really saying, not me. I'm not going to be persecuted. I'm not going to be crucified, just the way Peter had it. Peter didn't want to admit that he was a follower of Christ. After all, they might seize him and crucify him too. So he denied him, even though he had been warned. A little personal note, I personally found you may share little bites of the Master's teachings in everyday life and conversations as situations arise and warrant that sharing. You don't have to mention too much. For instance, the St. Michael cards that we have out. We know that accidents occur on the highway every day. And when those things happen and people say they're afraid to drive here or do this or do that, you can share the prayer of St. Michael, or you can just tell them, and this has worked for me. You just say, Archangel Michael, protect me. And I just give them that little teaching that even if you don't believe in the angels or haven't believed in them before, it is by divine will of God that when you call upon the angels, that they must come. So I've recently had my granddaughter graduating from high school and going on to college next month and out of state, and had the most difficult challenge of getting her a small gold St. Michael pendant. She has a card in her car. I tell her to say the prayer, but it's had been the most difficult initiation to receive this little pendant. And it's taken me since April, and now it's finally on its way. But that's how important it is to have the focus and to give people the teachings, even when they're not quite on the same page as you are. They look at you and they'll say, I wonder what she's doing. I wonder what he's doing. They seem to be having a pretty good time of their life, be in pretty good order. Maybe I'll try that. So Elizabeth Prophet says, well, we can deny the ascended masters when we fail to witness to their teachings. It is an effective denial of the path of the ascended masters, because it's not a private path. It is a responsibility, there's that word again, to transmute the truth to millions who are brainwashed. It's the real path of the avatars. It goes all the way home, and it doesn't stop. And I like what she says here, because it's so true. Another thing I'd like to just interject here. When I moved here to Florida, I had to meet new people, and I'm doing everything virtually through SAF. Some of my coworkers said, oh, what church do you go to? And I'd say, well, I do it online, and then I sometimes go to Chicago and visit with my church members. Oh, well, you need to find a church there. You must go here, you must go there. And they don't quite understand what we're doing. So it says here, Elizabeth Prophet says, it's the real path of the avatars. It goes all the way home, and it doesn't stop. And so this activity is for people who want to go all the way home. There are many churches where you don't have to go all the way, like the ones my coworkers were suggesting. You can stop with the healings on the hillside. You can be healed, but you don't have to become a healer. You can stop at any point in the mission, the 3-year mission of Jesus Christ. There's a church, and every church has a stopping point, and they're all beautiful, she says, as far as they go, aren't they? The Pope is beautiful as far as he goes, but he doesn't go very far, not very far at all. Not far enough to liberate the world or save the nations, but very beautiful as far as he goes. You need to take stock and say, the torch has been passed to me, but how far am I willing to run with it? How far are you willing to run with it? She says, you meet the goddess of liberty, and the first word she says, let liberty be proclaimed. If you want to follow me, you're going to have to be a spokesman for freedom. Keep the free nations free. That is the theme of the goddess of liberty and Saint Germain. There are only a certain number of free nations left in the world today. Some are semi-free, and we think we're a free nation in America, but some cities are not so free. There's a lot of situations happening right here in America, supposedly this free nation. So to proclaim the word is our calling, says Elizabeth Prophet, and you just have to get over the moment of fear, because once you plunge into the word, you become the word. You become a new person. You're born anew. You're buoyed up by the word. The word carries you. The Holy Spirit is with you. You're a new creature in Christ. You have a new purpose for living. And then she goes into the dictation again. Let truth excel and error fade. Let understanding flower. I am endowed with immortal tangibility, transcending appearance and enduring as immortal progress. My comment here, how would you like to be endowed with immortal tangibility? Tangibility means you can touch her. She's physical. She's right there in New York Harbor. People visit her, go into her being. She says here, Elizabeth Prophet, that means we can touch her. And she's immortality in our very midst. You know, America has a certain consciousness of immortality. You may not know this until you go abroad, as we spoke of before, and you realize how many nations have such a death consciousness, such a sense of, and life is a box, and being boxed in, there are limitless horizons in this country, and they are born out of the self-awareness of the goddess of liberty. That's that flame that those foreigners that came here felt. The dictation goes on. The many political and social freedoms which every school child ought to be comprehending at an early age are buried in academic assignment or remembered as mere grammatical form until the written test is passed, and then they molder into an archaic past to rise no more until recalled by threat or recital. The age of the log cabin president of the struggling soul, fighting seemingly insurmountable odds to acquire education, has passed. Today, men and women of letters move on the screen of life unpronounced, somewhat faded images of their illustrious historical counterparts. The assembly line education is part of the complications of modernity, which do not seem to yield the spiritual progress or even the political or economic advantages which outstanding patriots in each century had envisioned for the tired, the poor, and huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Yet the words progressive and forward moving are bandied about by men as though indicative of a true state of advancement, simply because of universal vocalization. In the midst of world turmoil and hollowed promises of social reform, the calm, Christly wisdom of the great white brotherhood is released in a torrent of divine love. It moves to still the raging seas and invokes in the many hearts and hands raised in supplication an understanding of the how and the why, and in what union men may assist the divine plan to be quickly fulfilled. And this is a dispensation which you may want to take note of that she gives in this dictation. You can write this down. Commencing with the date of July 4th, 1963, at the hour of 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, mighty tides of light shall be released to the entire planet, continuing for a number of months, not as yet determined by the Great Karmic Board. This release is subject to adjustment based on the receptivity of mankind. It is intended to activate a consciousness of liberty in the more sensitive, in a matter which will make it possible for a new burst of freedom to fire the hearts of men. This action is purposed to cause men to ponder the responsibility of being their brother's keepers. Beloved Saint Germain has released from on high in a recent statement in the Pearls of Wisdom an almost militant yet wholly Christ-like attitude of fierce determination to let wisdom and love prevail in the establishment of God's kingdom among men. For centuries preceding the birth of Christ, the wise men and magi looked for his appearing. In more recent times, the advent of the Christ consciousness as a universal expression of each newborn child has been heralded in each decade by sages of pure Christ truth. The earth is now passing through the Gethsemane of playing host to some of the most destructive youth ever to be assembled at one time upon the planet in all of her history. The ways of juvenile delinquency and human recalcitrance, the sorrowful and contagious disrespect of children for parents and even parents for children, is not a spiritual component to assist the unfoldment of a golden age, but rather a crucifixion of divine love upon the planetary body, given in the name of mercy, in order to once again those life streams re-embodied from past ages of human infamy, the opportunity of finding their freedom and way back home. The wise and perceptive will, of course, upon learning these facts, respond with compassionate heart to my plea. I too have a strong sense of dedication to redeem those life streams who, for one reason or another, have not been able to accept truth in the past. And therefore, in the name of cosmic liberty, I am opening and maintaining what may be called a court of lost souls throughout the coming year. July 4th, 1963, and this was added through July 4th, 1964. The entire Karmic Board has agreed to serve to make special adjustments, not only for the above-mentioned recalcitrant youth, but also for any and all from among mankind who feel that they are carrying an excess of karma and could find their freedom more easily if the weight thereof were mitigated or lifted temporarily in order for them to gain a new foothold. Mankind have simply to speak to me in their hearts or write me a letter setting forth the thoughts in their hearts, dedicated first to Almighty God the Father, and then to the Karmic Board of Cosmic Justice, and to myself as spokesman thereof. If you will place your letter in a metal dish and burn it with material fire by cosmic law, angels of mercy will catch the thoughts of your hearts and bear them to our council in the interest and name of divine mercy. Each appeal shall be heard. Each act of grace the divine law permits will be released in personal dispensation. Let us muster the forces of light to combat the tyranny of impersonal human creation that has made a long night of personal tragedy and bondage for the people of this blessed planet. Let us cut the cords of human bondage for the people of this blessed planet. Let us cut the cords of human bondage and usher in such a wave of God freedom to all upon earth, that each newborn child may breathe a different and holier atmosphere than ever before. In the name of mercy, keep on keeping on. In the name of justice, hold fast. In the cause of freedom, let all stand anchored and immovable. In my name, retain light's crown for the sake of the oppressed and ignorant, that all may progressively attain a more perfect way. By faith, let us move mountains. In God's name, let there be light. I am liberty. Again, if you would like to look this up, and I suggest that you do, it is volume 6, number 26, given on June 28th, 1963. And make a note within a few months of these immortal words of the Goddess of Liberty, President John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963, while riding in a presidential motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas at 12:30 p.m. on the 12 o'clock line of God power of the cosmic clock, the perversion noted as criticism, condemnation, and judgment. Opposite the very 6 o'clock line of God harmony and the sign of Cancer in which the goddess of liberty gave this dictation. And Elizabeth Prophet went on with her lecture and said, and recommended that you address your letter as directed on this pearl to God the Father, the karmic board, the goddess of liberty, whose title is the spokesman for the karmic board, and ask for the extension of the period for the court of lost souls, specifically for the exorcism of the most recalcitrant youth and life streams upon our planet, who today are what they are, not only by old Atlantean rebellion, but by the demon possession of their 4 lower bodies. And she says at that time in that lecture, there is also the opportunity for any one of you to make the call, to make your prayers for the setting aside, the temporary setting aside of karma, for you to accelerate, and as she states, to gain a new foothold. She says, karma is not simply taken from you, but it may be set aside while you accelerate and gain greater attainment. She said, I have seen people who have made rapid strides and progress, so long as the messengers or the masters are helping them carry their karma. I have seen them receive back a little grain or portion of that karma, which they, through the teachings, could so easily transmute by the violet flame and calls to Astrea. I have seen some people easily transmute it and add to their causal body of light. And she's seen others who became totally weighted down when their karma began to come back to them, as it lawfully must if you are to make your ascension. In other words, some people look like model students and full of light and blazing, and many times it is not because of attainment, but by the very grace of the ascended masters who sponsor them and are carrying their karma. Sometimes, she says, after 3, 4, 5 years on the path, when they know enough, the karma starts coming back, and would you believe it? She says they don't apply the teachings, but that karma embroiled them in another round of human experience and human karma making, and gets them lower and lower on the ladder when they should actually be going higher and standing and facing and conquering. The goddess of liberty wants to tell you this, she says, because what you can do for the planet today depends on how much of your own karma and world karma you are willing to balance. If you are a new student, you'd like to apply for that dispensation, you may do so. But it is like climbing up a mountain, she says. Someone in the universe will carry your pack. If you really need to have your pack carried for a while, there are beings of light who will be joyous to do so. But you should be prepared, she says, to take back that pack at the earliest moment when you feel strong enough to carry it, to balance the karma, and then carry someone else's pack and see how wonderful you feel joining the ranks of the Bodhisattvas, like the goddess of liberty. Carry someone else's pack and see how that feels. So this is a 1963 dispensation. It was given for 1 year. And now it was then, it's 16 years later. Now it's 63 years later. And you well know that this was the beginning. This pearl, June 28th, 1963, was the beginning of the turbulent 60s, the hippies, the drug culture, being introduced by fallen Atlanteans who had not been allowed to take embodiment until that very century, which was the 20th century, since the sinking of Atlantis. They are the ones that caused the sinking of Atlantis with the manipulation of science and energy, genetics. They're the ones who tested in test tubes, produced life. They're part of the laggard generations the great divine director talks about in the mechanization concept. And so these ones were kept in the astral plane. They weren't allowed to embody to further pollute the earth, not until that decade following the Second World War, from 1945 on. And by 1960, they were part of the mainstream of the movement of our youth, the turning of the tide, when for the first time, America was no longer allowed to defend freedom the world around. That came with Vietnam, and the entire war of Vietnam was totally misunderstood by our own people. And of course, the worst problem of all in Vietnam is that we ourselves did not control our movements. They went through the Security Council of the United Nations, controlled by the Soviets, and therefore there was every reason to rebel against the war, but not by the mere reasons, the horrors of war, but for the fact it was a no-win war, calculated by the Soviet Union and the seed of the wicked in this nation to give the victory that we actually won to the fallen ones. Therefore, it was a bloodbath of children of light, and we did not have leadership in the nation who could stand up against the international conspiracy, stand for truth, stand for righteousness, stand against the world dragon of communism. And today, 3 to 5 million people are murdered because of it in Cambodia, Vietnam. Two beautiful societies of beautiful light bearers been utterly destroyed. This can happen nation by nation when America and India do not come together on their rightful dharma to protect the peace and the freedom of the earth. So she says we live in a serious moment. The goddess of liberty at this moment was concerned with education, and we've been concerned with education. And Elizabeth Prophet talks about starting the Montessori International at the church in California at the time, and how many people had left the public school system. She called it the schools, the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place of the little child. She said, our educational system is calculated, if there's nothing else calculated to destroy America, but by the step-by-step destruction of the souls, of the minds, the hearts, the freedom, the creative process, the inner genius of our children, the opportunity for the soul to unite through the mind of the Christ, through the I am presence. There's no greater tragedy than the loss of a generation, and now generations. If it were not only through drugs, but the loss of a generation. And she refers to the educational system as a pig farm that we have as a public school system today. She said her heart was bowed down with the goddess of liberty and with Mother Mary. And when she saw the individuals who were in the classroom, in the high schools, when she sees the young children on drugs, having abortions without proper counseling or understanding of life, we know you are burdened also, she said, and we know you pray fervently. But what is not happening is that greater numbers of people are not seeing it and doing something about it. She talks about the busing that started to take children out of their own neighborhoods and have them on buses for hours and hours, going to other school systems to somewhat integrate falsely into other cultures or neighborhoods. She says, we feel as we are in a race of time and space. We know Gautama Buddha gave us 10 years and a 10-year plan. And Gautama Buddha inaugurated a 10-year plan to turn the tide on May 8, 1977, of the darkness in the earth. And we're well past that here in 2026. So these words of the goddess of liberty and our beloved messenger, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, I leave you now with the words of a great philosopher, French diplomat, historian, Alexis de Tocqueville. He lived in the 19th century, and he's best known for his works on the American experiment, democracy in America, and the old regime and the revolution. He wrote these before the Civil War. In both, he analyzed the living standards and social conditions of individuals, as well as the relationship to the market and state in Western societies. He published them after he traveled in the United States and is considered today an early work of sociology and political science. But in his maturity, he reflected in his ruined health at that point in time in the south of Italy in the winter to repair his health. He reflected on the history of liberty, and he was baffled by the task of explaining it to others. And he said to a friend as he walked in the beauty of southern Italy, he said, he was puzzled by the history of liberty and was baffled by the task of explaining its meaning to others. And I love these words, and I'd like you to carry them in the heart of the goddess of liberty with you. He said, the love of liberty defies analysis. Do not ask me to analyze this sublime sentiment. It is something one must feel, and logic has no part in it. It enters of itself into the noble hearts that God has prepared to receive it. It fills them and enraptures them. We cannot explain it to souls who have never felt it. In the name of the goddess of liberty, in the name of the mighty I am presence and holy Christ self of each one of you, we seal this message and this teaching in the heart of liberty. Amen.